Welcome back to the Made for This podcast, where we want to help you discover, develop, and live your Made for This. We are back here with part 2 of our episode on how to discover your Made for This. If you haven't been following along, we've spent these first few episodes of the podcast talking about, what is Made for This? When we say that, what do we mean? Why it's even important to go through this exercise. And then this last episode and this episode, we're talking about how can you start to step into figuring out what yours is. Or maybe you are way down the road and you kind of have some ideas. This exercise, these questions can kind of help you to get a little deeper into that. Or maybe you are brand new to this, have no idea what we're even talking about, and this exercise is a great way for you to start asking the right questions. So, Nikki, you want to give us just a little bit of a recap from last episode?
Yeah, so we in the last episode went over the first kind of half of the exercise that was really your natural giftings, things that you were born with that really don't require any effort from you. So we talked about your personality, just kind of how you're wired as an individual and what kind of assessments and things that you could take to start to learn more about your unique personality. We talked about passion, those things that really fire you up and make you want to get involved. And then we talked about
Andy Reid around.
Yeah. And then we talked about strengths. And so those are a little bit different than personality, but just your natural giftings, things that can be developed or can just be left as is, but just those things that you naturally kind of come equipped with.
Yeah. And so in this second part of the exercise, we want to talk about the things that take a little bit more from you. Those things, as Nikki said, are you're kind of born with most of those things, and there's some nuance to that. We also talked about in the last episode that none of this stuff is gospel truth. It's not. You are one of one, and so these are broad strokes,
Right.
but they're good, kind of generalized understanding of where you might fit into things. But then, as we move into this week, the skills and experiences components of the exercise, these are the things that you've had to either sit with and experience directly, or things that you've really had to put in the the sweat equity to get to. And so that's kind of where we're going to be today. But before we do that, we like to start every episode with just a little bit of an interesting discussion. And in this one, I want to know, Nikki, we talked a little bit about this off mic, but when you are sending text messages, and remember, if you're listening to this and you can leave us a comment or shoot us an email, we want to hear from you too, because these little silly debate questions are fun to engage with a wider community. But when you're sending a text message, do you think that punctuation is appropriate?
I think punctuation is aggressive.
Okay, tell me why you think it's aggressive.
Well, okay. So I do use a lot of exclamations, and mainly
That's
that,
the most aggressive punctuation.
but I use it in like a haha, I'm so silly. Like it's more of like I want people to know I'm excited so that it doesn't come across as like a deadpan kind of thing. I use more emojis than anything to clarify because I'm an overthinker and I really want to make sure that I'm not read incorrectly. So I use a lot of parentheses. I use a lot of emojis because I would never want someone to read the wrong tone into a message. But I think like commas and the dots and the periods and all of that are just they're a little passive aggressive. I feel like when I read those kind of things, I'm like, okay.
Well,
Like,
did that guy just use a comma in his
Yeah,
list
when
of
we
things?
first started dating, John punctuated his text messages all the time, and I gave him so much crap for it. Like, I'm like, "Why are you using commas? Like, what are you doing?"
Okay,
He
well,
doesn't do it so much now.
Well, John and I can identify in that way because I when I send a text message, it's basically grammatically correct. Like I will use the appropriate punctuation. And I
Yeah.
feel like maybe I don't know how it's read, but let me ask you this. Do you use appropriate punctuation in an email?
Who am I emailing?
Well, uh, like just an average email, maybe not to a best friend, but probably not also to your boss or whoever. Like just an average email.
Probably not.
No?
Mm,
Just you send it like a text message?
yeah,
Hmm,
for the most part.
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm much more formal than that, I guess. Email, I'm even more formal than a
I
text.
tell you what is tricky for me in email is knowing whether to refer to someone by their first name or like Mrs. or Mr. So and so. I converse by email a lot with principals of schools.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm never sure especially if they refer to me by my first name, that I'm like, is
Mhm.
this a quid pro quo thing? Like, can I refer to them by their first name?
Or am I supposed to call you, like, Principal Nikki? Like
Right. Like, I feel that one now. I've got one principal that we're on a first name basis, and so I don't ever consider that with her. But the other ones, I'm like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of a weird gray area.
Yeah, I feel that in some emails, depending on who I'm
Yeah.
especially if I'm operating, like, as my business, like, I wanna be really cautious of those things, but and I don't send a lot of text messages from my business with my business hat on, although some,
Yeah.
but I yeah, when I'm
You're a
sending
little
it
bit younger than me. Did you have to take keyboarding classes?
a little bit.
Okay. I think some of that is just a natural, like, I'm so just adverse from the
Mhm.
keyboarding classes that I'm like, no,
You just
not
push
gonna,
them back.
yeah,
I think
not
I
double spacing ever again.
I think I took you don't have to double space
I
anymore.
know.
I think I took keyboarding
They
1
told us we
year.
had to.
Yeah, I did it for I
It's
until just a couple
ridiculous.
of years ago, I think. I was like, "Wait a second, I don't have to do that anymore." And so
Yeah.
I had to retrain myself
Mhm.
not to.
Silly.
Although on an iPhone, you double tap spacebar and it just gives you the period and the single space. You wouldn't know that because you don't use periods.
I wouldn't know that. Apparently iPhones are on your side.
Yeah, they are. You
So,
just double tap space as though you're on a typewriter, apparently, and it gives you period, single space. You start the next, and it starts the next sentence on a capital letter.
hmm,
It's yeah,
that's
it's great.
interesting.
I use I will get all the way to a semicolon if I have to in a text message.
When is a semicolon appropriate? I don't
Well,
even know that I know when to use a semicolon.
yeah, semicolons are a little tricky. I think that I know 80% of the time how to use it.
Mm,
Although also, I'm pretty sure that you can always ditch a semicolon and start a new sentence if you need to. And
mm,
in a text message, maybe that's more appropriate. But you've seen my text messages. Sometimes I'll write long text
yeah.
and I will,
I lean more towards the multiple text
yeah,
because sometimes I will send,
that's another
like,
good question.
as my thoughts come in. It's like,
That's
oh,
another
yeah.
good question. Leave us a comment. Let us know if you will send 8 short text messages in a row or one long, well thought out text message.
Yeah.
Because I'm always going to send a long block of text and it will be punctuated and hopefully not read as aggression. And there will be
Sometimes the sheer length of it is aggressive. Just, ugh.
yeah, that's true. I know that I have turned people off with the length of my emails for sure, and probably text messages
Yeah.
too. I definitely know that has happened.
AI will shorten your emails for you.
I know, but then
Okay.
it's not me. Like then I feel like I got to throw my salt and pepper back onto it.
And then it's long again. So either way,
Yeah, yeah.
it happens.
That's a skill I've actually been working on. Is trying to shorten, just be more concise.
Mm,
I know that's a weakness of mine. It's probably the overthinking thing. So whereas you don't use punctuation because you don't want it to read
right.
incorrectly, I will just explain every
Yeah.
single aspect so it can't be read incorrectly.
Yeah. I just clarify with parentheses. I'm like, I have like an off screen narrator to the text message. Like, this is the text message. And then the narrator goes, what she meant was,
All right, so let us know if you use punctuation or not in your text messages, or maybe you're one of those just straight voice memo people. Which, by the way, I don't like those, but you could be that person. I don't mind those in certain aspects, but as a text conversation,
my daughter's almost 11, and I call her a Zoomer all the
mhm.
time because she uses voice to text.
Oh,
And it reminds me of a little grandma.
yeah.
And she talks on speakerphone. And it just, and she gets really angry at technology. Just,
I will talk on speakerphone, but now I put my AirPods in.
yeah.
Before I had AirPods, I was a speaker. Aren't millennials speakerphone folks? You're not a speakerphone person?
Mm-mm. I
Oh.
used to have to take the corded phone into the bathroom so nobody listened to my conversation. Therefore, I'm a private phone conversation person.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I don't know why the speakerphone thing. I think that was like it just like a lot of people did it though.
Mhm. Yeah,
I don't
just
do it in
because you
public.
had it, you could.
I don't know. Okay. All right. We digress. But so we are looking at the kind of the back half of the made for this exercise in this episode, and as Nikki said, this is sort of the time that or the elements where you've kind of had to spend some time developing these things, and so the first one, again, last week we went through personality, passion, and strengths, and then this next one, the fourth element is skills, and the skills. I mean, you can look up skill in the dictionary.
Right.
But these are the things that you've gotten good at, and most of the time, you've gotten good at these things because you've practiced and
Mhm.
you've developed them, and they may have come from a place of, I'm naturally talented in this area,
Right.
so I took 1,000 hours and I devoted them to taking something I'm pretty good at and becoming world class at it. How would you describe kind of this part of the exercise?
Yeah. So I'd say skills are all of those things. I also think that your skills in this area um, can sometimes be things that can be developed easier for you than they could be for
Oh yeah,
somebody else.
I think so.
You're a natural learner.
Hmm.
I hate reading instructions. So it is naturally easier for you to learn a new skill where I have to really want to learn the new skill because the learning thing just doesn't come as easy to me. I really am more of like a hands-on. I just want to get in there and mess up and break stuff and figure it out along the way.
Yeah, that makes
So,
sense. That is a good point that we said in the last episode that this is all kind of built around like the idea of a
right.
funnel. Like the top level things are just the most general things about you,
Mhm.
and as it funnels down, it's the most specific things about you. And the very last thing is experience, and those are the things that are so specific that only you have had the
Right.
experiences that you've had. But skills are the things as we've come through the funnel and we've come through strengths,
Mhm.
like you do tend to develop things that you can get good at. Like I haven't spent a lot of time developing my carpentry skills because I can spend 1,000 hours on something. I have a shelf in my a bookshelf in my bedroom, and there is a piece of the shelf where I was trying to nail from the back, like the backing
Mhm.
of the shelf into like the part where the books sit, right?
Yeah.
From the frame to the actual shelf. And there are about 5 holes where I missed
I can attest to this. I've seen this bookshelf.
I missed the shelf, and I got it, but it took me, I don't know, way too long. And I was calling my dad on FaceTime and showing him the shelf. I was like, "Can you tell me how's this? Can you help me with this?" And he would walk me through things, but there's nothing natural about that for me. And so that's not something I've spent a lot of time developing.
Yeah.
However, if I just kind of had a natural ability to do those things, I might have spent more hours doing them, and
Right.
then I would have gotten even better. And that's how we talked last week about the Strengths Finder,
Mhm.
and those are things you're naturally talented in, but they still require some effort. And so when it comes to skills, you're taking a look at the things that I'm naturally good at, and then I'm going to start pouring gasoline on those
Yeah.
talents and make them really like world class skills. Or
Mhm.
this is the skill set that I walk around with, in terms of I have spent the time and energy. I've learned. I've developed these things, and now they're like I can come into a room and be the expert on something
Yeah.
because I've taken the time to do that. So,
Yeah, these are I think of skills as similarly to, like you may have a natural athletic gifting,
hmm,
but you can't be great at a sport unless you practice that sport.
right,
So just that natural athletic ability doesn't really do anything until you develop it. And so you've got to kind of put some work into that, even though it's a natural gifting. You've got to develop it and do something with it. Otherwise, it
yeah,
just kind of sits there as potential. So I think of strengths as kind of potential. They're
yeah,
there and it's a potential and you can use it or you can not.
hmm,
I mean, we've seen people with some strengths that were like, I didn't even know that was a strength you had because they weren't using it,
right,
at least not that we could see. And so sometimes you can just leave kind of strengths on the table
yeah. That
and
and
not really develop them.
that's a really good analogy, the sports analogy. I have a friend who is very naturally gifted athletically. He's now a professional athlete, and I have seen this guy. Um, he can go to a basketball court and outplay most average people.
Hmm.
He can go out onto like a football field and outplay average people, but he's not in the NBA. He's not in
Right.
the NFL because he's very good at those things, very natural at those
Right.
things, way more athletic than me. He beats me at all of those things anyway. But he spent a whole lot of time taking his natural athletic ability and has honed that into martial arts, and now he's in the UFC.
Yeah.
And so he's not in the NBA, he's not in the NFL, but he is in the UFC. And because he took a very natural strength
Right.
of his, or an ability that he was just kind of born with, and he has spent thousands of hours
Yeah.
sharpening tools and skills and developing something that has now made him world class at that thing. We need to get him on the podcast
Yeah.
sometime.
Had he have not done that, he would have just been like a really great pickleball player.
Yeah, yeah, probably. Yeah. He would have, but he would have been probably the best pickleball
Well,
player that I know.
yeah.
Because I've seen, it's funny how talent and skill work,
Mhm.
because I've seen Nathan is the guy that I'm talking about, Nathan Manus. I've seen him play basketball with people and just do anything athletic, and it's just like, man, like I wish I was that athletic.
Yeah.
He's very natural at it, but also, at the highest levels, the LeBron James and the Travis Kelce's, and at the highest level
Mhm.
of those sports, it has required maybe some talent,
Yeah.
but a lot of sweat equity, a lot of intentionality and effort, and just practice and failing and
Mhm.
trying again and failing and trying again. And that's what I've seen Nathan do, what he didn't do with basketball, football,
Right.
pickleball, or whatever. Like, he did that with fighting, and it's got him where he is.
Yeah.
I think that and it may be a good exercise for any of us as we're trying to develop or discover even our made for this, figure out the things that, like, yeah, I'm naturally whatever, naturally athletic, I'm naturally techie, I'm naturally handy. And then when you see those natural giftings, then you can say, I need to spend 3 hours a week or whatever
Yeah.
focusing on these things that I'm naturally gifted at, and turn those into something that you're just very good at.
Mhm.
And those are things that, you've put in the effort, you've put in the 10,000 hours to become an expert or whatever. And now you can actually step into a room and be like, I can solve this
Yeah.
because I've worked on it.
And I will say, out of personal experience, I was just thinking through when we were kind of thinking through skills and things like that. Um, One of the skills that I've developed is public speaking, but in one specific area.
Hmm.
Public speaking is, for people who have seen me public speak, they probably wouldn't believe this. It is a very big, like, fear of mine.
Hmm.
I don't naturally gravitate towards public speaking. And as a younger person, I would sometimes pass out in those situations. I would lock my knees and just, I was done for. But as I started to learn about my passion with helping teenagers navigate life decisions and developing their beliefs and things like that, as I was honing those skills and learning how to teach those things really well, I developed public speaking skills in that specific arena. I still am terrified to go into a room full of adults
Hmm.
and stand on a stage with a microphone and speak to adults. But you give me a room of 300 teenagers and have me talk to them about puberty and relationships. It's no sweat at all. It doesn't even make me nervous anymore. And so that was something that I paired strengths
Hmm.
and kind of natural personality type things with something that maybe wasn't necessarily a strength, but probably wasn't necessarily a weakness either, because you don't want to spend a bunch of time on stuff that you just really aren't good at,
Right.
trying to get mediocre at. But because of those strengths and abilities, those strengths and natural wirings, those kind of help to push that to a level of competency
Yeah.
to where it became a skill.
Yeah.
And so it kind of pairs with those things. And so there may be some things in your skill set that maybe aren't natural strengths, but alongside strengths and passion,
Hmm.
they get developed
Yeah, we
along
talked
the way.
a little bit last week about things that sometimes we just got to do things,
Mhm.
and we may not, they may be frustrating, or we
Right.
may not be naturally good at them, but sometimes you just got to get certain things done.
Yeah.
And if you're in a position, whether it's professional or maybe as a parent, you're put in these positions where something's not necessarily natural for you, but you put in the reps and you
Yeah.
can become skilled at something even if you're not talented at it. And so, while strengths and talents, or rather strengths and skills, do go really well together, and you're
Mhm.
probably going to make quicker progress
Yeah.
developing skills in your areas of strength, they don't have to go together every single time,
Right.
because you're right. You can develop things that you're passionate about, even though you're maybe not that good at them yet.
Right.
You can put the reps in, you can
Yeah.
get there.
I will say, just don't put in the reps for things that aren't moving those things forward.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm never going to be a skilled musician. And
Right.
they're like, there's no sense at this point in my life at putting thousands of hours into being able to play a few chords on a guitar,
Yeah. I've heard.
because that's not going to move my passion forward. That's not going to get me closer to my made for this. And so there's not really a lot of reason for me to put reps in there. But if it's something like I really need to get better at the learning thing and like really spending the time and not getting frustrated with the directions and all that kind of stuff to be able to further my made for this. And so that's something that I probably will be willing to put in some reps to, even though it doesn't come naturally to me.
Yeah, that's good. I've heard it said a handful of different ways, but to water your green spots,
Yeah.
to kind of look for the areas where, you know, a little bit of water is going to really make a big difference, and
Hmm.
you can really make something that you're talented in a world class strength, or rather skill.
Right.
Um, but then, you know, if you have to dump buckets of water on
Right.
something else to get it just to sprout a little like
Yeah.
competency, then that might not be worth as many of the resources. Again, you don't want to be so bad at something that you need to do that you can't
Right.
get it done. But if you can, you know, if you're if you're an employer and you can hire someone to do that
Hmm.
for you, or if you're, you know, a nonprofit or a church leader, or anyone in any sphere, if you can bring other people
Yeah.
alongside you to shore up some of your weaknesses, then you don't have to dump all of your resources into
Yeah.
getting mediocre at something you're not necessarily wired to do.
Right. You don't have to sit in all the seats.
That's right. Don't sit in all the seats, because the whole idea of the Made for This is there's one seat that really belongs to you.
Hmm.
And you could play musical chairs probably, and you're going to be less fulfilled and
Right.
less effective. Or you can find that seat that was made for you, and you can sit in it, and then you're making the biggest impact, and you're the most fulfilled, and you're the happiest. And yeah, that's
And
for
nobody
sure.
wants to play musical chairs with a chair hog.
That's true. That's true.
Other people are just standing around going, I
Yeah.
could have sat there.
I could have, there's five more chairs and that guy's got four of them. Yeah. I've seen that. That's, that's true. I feel like I have a toddler that lives here that would take three or four of the chairs
My
during,
chairs.
during musical chairs. So anything else you think of on the skill area that kind of comes to mind?
No, I think that one can shift and grow over a course too. I don't think that one's set in stone.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think as you kind of progress and you're living life, and as you get into your made for this and you're living it out, you're going to find that there are skills that you're going to continually develop and you're going to learn new things. That's that growth mindset of
Yeah.
like, if you know everything, what is it? As Liz Bohannon talks about
Yeah.
going back to, like, always going back to that conscious incompetence,
Yep.
like never just staying at a place of like, I'm great at this and I don't even have to think about it, but always pushing yourself into that place of conscious incompetence of like, I'm starting back at the beginning, I'm learning something new. So I
Yeah.
think that's the one on here that you're continually kind of looking for new ways to grow that and looking for new ways to develop and better yourself so that you can continue to live your made for this.
Yeah, you asked me a question on our very first episode of whether or not I thought you're made for this changes,
Mhm.
and I guess my answer would still be, I don't think that it just wholesale just flip flops or
Right.
changes, but I think it evolves as we grow and develop. And the last element that we're going to talk about here in just a moment is our experiences.
Mhm.
As we continually experience things every day and every week and every year of our lives, we evolve as people, and our made for this sort of continues to shape as we experience things, and we start to see the world through the lens of those other experiences. And as we do those things, we may pick and choose new skills to
Right.
develop, or we may end up in a new, like you said, Liz Bohannon kind of challenges people to step from their unconscious competence
Mhm.
back into conscious and
Conscious and
competent.
competent. Yeah.
And that could be a promotion at work. You could
Mhm.
say, you know, I'm really good at what I do. But if I take the supervisor job, or if I take like a lateral move, and now I'm like, ugh, I'm like, I can get good at this again,
Yeah.
but I'm not good at it today. And so you could still be, you know, living inside of, as you look at the top of the funnel, this is still inside of your personality and your
Yeah.
passions and your strengths. But I may need some new skills here. And as I experience things and as I develop those new skills, you're made for this will sort of shift
Right.
along with you. And so, yeah, that's really, it's important to always have that growth mindset, continually
Mhm.
developing your skills, and as you trek on. So our last thing here, and this is the biggest one in turn. It's the smallest one on the funnel,
Yeah.
because it's only you.
Right.
It's as it goes from very general to very specific.
Mhm.
Your experiences are only you. But also this one, I think, to me is the biggest, because I think it really is the most impactful
Yeah.
for you, but also how you impact the world around you.
Mhm.
There's a quote that I wish I could attribute to the right person. I'll try and look it up and put it in the show notes if I can find it. But there's a quote that says that people will admire you for your strengths. So people are going to see you just rocking it as a public speaker or as a UFC fighter or whatever. They're going to admire you for those things, but they're going to connect with you in your weakness.
Mhm.
And that's where experience really, I think, gives you something that nothing else on this in this exercise can
Right.
give you, because when you've experienced hard things and you have discovered your weaknesses and you've discovered like where your pain points and all those things are, it really starts to give others a way to identify with you.
Mhm.
And so if you've experienced some hard things, I've now stepped into parenting three toddlers, and that's tough. And I have weaknesses in that area, and so people aren't going to look at me and be like, "Oh, that guy's the top blogger on fatherhood."
Yeah.
They're not admiring that strength, but they can see where I struggle, and they can say, "Yeah, I've been there."
Mhm.
And so that gives me, I think what's really fascinating about the experiences element is that this is what's going to give you a unique credibility in
Mhm.
certain rooms that
Yeah.
not everyone's going to have. I mean, you and I, Nikki, could walk into the same room and people are going to listen to you that they are not going to listen to me. And then
Yeah.
in a different room could be the exact opposite because of the experiences you've had and
Right.
how you've navigated life. And because of those experiences, the skills and strengths and all those things that you've developed versus
Yeah.
in the other room, I'm the opposite of
Mhm.
that.
And those experiences I have found in my personal life, where my experiences have impacted people that I didn't realize
Yeah.
they were going to, or even initially, like I had a young adult that our first experience with each other, I was sharing some of my background and why I do what I do. And I could tell that he was like visibly uncomfortable with things I had experienced in my past.
Mhm.
But fast forward like a year later, he reached out to me in a tough moment where he was navigating some of the things that I had spoken about and was like, I really want your perspective on this because of your experience.
Yep.
And so it was one of those moments where I was like, huh, here I thought my experiences had pushed him away.
Mhm.
And really, they had given me some credibility because I had been vulnerable, that he was able to say, I
Yeah.
respect your opinion, and I think that you're going to be able to give some perspective on this. And I've experienced that a few times with teenagers, that I've shared things that some adults may be like, "Ooh, I would never show that weakness."
Mhm.
But it came across as like, you're a regular person and you know what you're talking about because you've experienced things. And so it's bought me credibility in spaces that if I had kept those experiences to myself or tried to put on a more polished front,
Right.
and not shared vulnerabilities and things like that, I wouldn't have earned the trust, that I've earned in
Yeah.
the spaces that I've been in.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that in the experience component of this exercise, you do want to look at the really positive things you've experienced.
Mhm.
You want to say, I've been to these places and I've done these things, but you also want to really examine where you've struggled and
Yeah.
where you've bumped into really difficult seasons and circumstances, because often those are the things that are going to really give you the most credibility. As you said with that individual, you may not have been able to speak into what he was navigating later on had it not been for
Yeah.
the experiences that you had and then shared. And so as you go through this exercise, and as we said in the last episode, as you talk with other people in
Mhm.
your sphere of influence in your community about these things, really be thinking about, what are the things that I've experienced in my life that give me a unique audience?
Yeah.
Um, and if you can answer that question, then you've really taken a big step
Mhm.
into what you might then be able to call you were made for this.
Yeah.
Because I've never experienced the things you've experienced, Nikki. You've never experienced the things that I've experienced. And there's nobody listening to this podcast at all right now that, and even future, as this podcast
Right.
lives, nobody will ever listen to this that has shared our exact same
Mhm.
experiences, and there never will be, because we each of us are one of one.
Right.
And so there are people who are an Enneagram 1 like me, and that are passionate about the things I'm passionate about, gifted in the areas I'm gifted,
Mhm.
have developed some of the same skills as me even, but they haven't walked the road that I've walked. They
Yeah.
don't have, my family and my wife and the 3 toddlers that live here, and they haven't experienced those things at the times and in the ways that I have, and that makes me so unique, and it makes every single one of us, one of one, and
Yeah.
that is where you really start to identify your seat.
Yeah. I do think this part of the exercise, while it's at the bottom of the funnel, which makes it seem like the smallest, um, if I were to give somebody advice, I would say spend the most time
Oh,
on
yeah.
this part of the exercise. Because something that I've learned, and I think that Vanessa Van Edwards, some of
Mhm.
her work with how to connect with people really helped me kind of hone this skill. You don't want to become an oversharer. You don't want to become
Right.
someone who spews your experiences out on everybody that you meet. There's a skill that you can develop with experiences of learning how to be vulnerable in the right moments.
Yeah.
And if you know your experiences well and you know which experiences inform your made for this well, you're much better at recognizing when to do that and how to do that and what to share.
Mhm.
Because I think we can have a tendency to just want to. I know me personally. If someone's telling me a story, I will sometimes tell them something about myself to connect to them, but it can kind of come off as like a one-upping
Oh,
situation.
yeah.
So I have to be cautious of that. What I'm really trying to say is I was listening to you and I have a similar experience and I want to tell you about it so we can connect. But I have to be conscious of that and learn how to be vulnerable and share appropriately for it to make the best impact. And I think that's a skill that has to be developed and you have to sit with your experiences
Yeah.
to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think vulnerability is something that being vulnerable is something you can only do based on your own experiences.
Mhm.
But it's also not a natural. I don't know. Maybe. Well, I wouldn't say. I would say that vulnerability is never natural. I
No.
would say that oversharing may come natural to some people,
Yeah.
but being vulnerable is something that requires discomfort
Mhm.
and it requires a little intentionality and probably practice. I know
Yeah.
Brene Brown has a bunch of
Mhm.
content on that, and I know that you, as a giant Brene Brown fan, might be able to. We maybe can link some of that in the show notes.
Yeah.
But really, I think that um, spending the time in this part of the exercise, the experience component, and figuring out where you can be vulnerable with your
Mhm.
weak areas or your challenges or whatever really does give you the greatest ability to make an impact on the world around you. And when we talk about the made for this and making an impact on the world around you, like you don't have to be a world
Right.
leader or anything like that. But your pocket of the world, you can make a better place, and only you can do it in the way that you can do it.
Yeah.
And so, spending the time walking through the exercise, but like you said, Nikki, spending the most time navigating, examining, like what have I experienced?
Mhm.
I've done some exercises with, and actually, I guess I would say that this is probably a part of the exercise you should do more frequently because I've done some exercises with leaders that I've had in the past who asked me some questions that like I didn't really have a good answer for. Like I've never really experienced anything like that. Well, the older I get, the more that I have
Mhm.
experienced it. And then like, okay, well now that colors the world a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Now I'm a parent. I wasn't at that time and like I couldn't identify with these things. Now
Mhm.
I can. Well, I'm a, a small business owner. I couldn't identify with certain things that I can now.
Right.
And the more that you experience and the more you revisit those things, like where can I connect with people in my areas of weakness, be vulnerable, the more you can figure out like how you can really shape the world around you.
Yeah. On the flip side of that too, and this may not pertain to this at all, um, I think it's very valuable to recognize when you aren't able to understand someone's experience
Yeah.
too. Inside of your made for this, like I can be spending time with teenagers and I have to be willing to admit that their teenage experience is entirely different
Yeah.
than what I experience. I can never even hope to be able to understand what teenagers are up against now. And it's unfair for me to say, oh, yeah, I was a middle schooler too once
Yeah.
because it wasn't the same.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of credibility earned through being able to say, I have no idea what you're up against.
Mhm.
Like I've said to my own son, I don't know how stupid I would have been if I had a smartphone when I was your age.
Right.
I didn't, I don't have the history to tell you. So I can't say, I never would have done anything dumb like that
Yeah.
because I didn't have that experience. And so it's really not fair for me to try to speak into, like similar, if you don't have kids, you can't give parenting advice.
Right.
You can't say, well, if I was a parent, nobody likes that person. Don't do that. So being wise enough and self-aware enough to be able to say, I can still impact this person. I can relate to them, maybe with a different experience, but being kind of humble enough to say, wow, like that's a really intense experience that you had. And I really can't imagine that.
Well, and it helps to recognize that nobody's ever experienced what you've
Right.
experienced. And so you've never experienced what anyone else has
Yeah.
experienced. And being able to say, hey, we have some commonalities here,
Hmm.
but you've experienced these, or I've experienced these things,
Hmm.
and those things are just totally different. And that really can help navigating some of those conversations. Yeah. So is there anything else that comes to your mind as we kind of wrap up the exercise in its totality?
We've said, don't do this alone.
Definitely don't do it alone.
Have other voices in there. Take your time, give yourself grace.
Mm-hmm.
You can always start back at the top of the funnel.
Yeah.
You can do this a few times. You can go back through it. You can, kind of
Come
hone
back
these
and listen to
things.
these episodes.
Yeah. And I think I would say to anybody, you don't have to have this down and perfected to start living your made for this.
Absolutely.
If you have some idea of what you're passionate about, if you have some idea of what your strengths are, what your skills are, get out there and do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
The worst case scenario is it's just not for you. And that's
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Get out of the seat, move on, let somebody else have it. But try things, because that's the most important part, is getting out there and seeing what it is. I said yes to part of my made for this 7 years ago. And really, I only said yes because a friend asked me.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, I was like, I don't think I'm going to like this because of the public speaking piece, and I don't know what to do. And here I am 7 years later, like I can't imagine
Mm-hmm.
not doing what I do. Sometimes we just have to get in there and then develop the rest as we go along.
Yeah. And if you only know one or two pieces of this,
Yeah.
like, I'm really passionate about this and I know that I'm an extrovert. Like, that's kind of what I know. Like, you can start walking through the exercise, but take steps,
Mhm.
whether it's just, getting into a community of people where you can ask the right questions,
Right.
or pitch the right questions that you can interact with together, ask one another, or whatever it is. Just take a step, walk through the exercise, and just do something.
Yeah.
Because you'll never know until you start taking one step after the other.
Right. If we always keep it as just an exercise, you're not going to live your made for this.
Yep.
So you kind of have to get it from head to action.
Yep.
It can't just be this academic thing that we're just learning all these tests and learning everything about ourselves. We have to actually share ourselves with our community.
Yep, that's good. So that kind of wraps up our the main exercise of discovering, I guess, and starting to develop your made for this. So if you like this, don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you're listening to this, and come back and listen to these again if you need to. And if you are totally at a loss and don't know what to do next, send us an email or drop us a comment wherever you're watching, listening, and we'll talk to you.
Yeah.
We would love to have the conversation with you and start to navigate some of these things with the community, because ultimately we're really passionate about seeing you step into your made for this, and just make a dent on whatever little pocket of the world you're in. Just like what we want to do, we want you to do that too. So
yeah.
So that wraps us up for this episode. In the next couple episodes, Nikki and I are actually going to kind of interview one another on our own made for this. Made for this is that, how do you pluralize that?
That's like cul-de-sac.
Cul-de-sac, yeah. Cul-de-sacs, cul-de-sac. That's a weird one.
Made for's this.
Made for's this. Yeah, there you go. We're going to interview one another on ours, and so you can kind of see what this looks like in practice and in just really practical terms with Nikki and I. And then beyond that, we're going to start having some other voices on here and hearing from people who are either experts in fields that are related to this, or who are really doing some like made for this living and just rocking it and impacting the world around them, either big or small. And so that's where we're going next. So if you like this, don't forget to subscribe, and we will talk to you on the next episode.